Welcome back to another episode of The Scots in Us. I'm Camilla Hellman, and this week we're diving back into the world of Scotland's distilleries and how they handle the US whiskey distribution. It's a complex matter. We love being a part of the vibrant growth of the distilleries in Scotland, from Arbaiki to Linden Lime, to Isle of Harris Distillery and Eden Mills, to Lindores and more. All of them normally start with a gin and then move in to a whiskey. We have enjoyed watching their progress and sharing with you their expansion and development. It's been an explosion of distilleries over the past 10 years, but not all of them are having an easy road making it into the United States. And so we turn to Robin Robinson. He's a whiskey expert in marketing and promotion of distilleries. And we are very fortunate that he helps us curate our tastings that we hold at our various events. And so Robin is going to explain to us the complexity of how you need a separate license and agreement per state and the many pitfalls that they have to go through in order to move their businesses along. After that, we're delighted to be speaking with the exciting emerging brand Eden Mills, whose first release was in 2018. Available mainly on the West Coast, Eden Mills has some wonderful new releases and has begun expanding onto the East Coast. He's an example, alongside Robin's insights, of how you have to progress so carefully in the distribution of your product into the US. And so without more ado, let's join Robin Robinson. This week, I'm really delighted that we're able to catch up with Robin Robinson, who's a dear friend to the American Scottish Foundation, acting as curator of many of our whiskey tastings at our events, bringing us new and exciting different things all the time. Robin is an author of a wonderful book, which we'll get to later, and also sales and marketing consultant, helping brands when they're trying to emerge into the market and develop themselves. And so, good afternoon, Robin. How are you?
I'm well, Camilla. Good to see you again. Good to hear from you.
Thank you. So we're doing this week a catch-up on the distilleries and whiskies and gins of Scotland. And I wondered if you could bring us up to date on some of the things you're hearing about and seeing that are new, different, emerging, happening in the marketplace.
Wow. Well, so yeah, there's an enormous amount of activity going on right now. We have been seeing probably in the past 5 years more new whiskeys come out of Scotland and gins than we've seen in the past 30. The whole world went through a whiskey downturn back in the 1970s and the 1980s. That caused whiskey production to drop. In Scotland, they actually had a very interesting term for it. They referred to those days as the whiskey loch, whereas the word loch is Gaelic for lake, which meant that there was enough whiskey sitting in the warehouses to fill up a lake. And then what happened was they started closing down distilleries. And it kind of laid that way for about 10, 15 years. And then the 21st century rediscovered whiskey. Millennials, for example, have kind of recalibrated their palates and started drinking whiskey. The first ones out of the gate in the United States was Scotch whiskey. Everyone suddenly was drinking a single malt. And suddenly they're showing up in cocktail bars and people are drinking them like crazy. And even some blends started to actually reactivate at that time. And some of the newer blenders like Compass Box started to show up on the scene.
Was this a time when they started to introduce all the aging? The 15-year-old, the 20-year-old, did that grow, that sort of giving it a bit more of a label?
Essentially, that was at a time when people started to understand what an age statement meant. People started to equate older is better. And that's not necessarily the truth. It's one factor. So whenever you went to a whiskey festival, most newbies to the whiskey industry would come up to a whiskey table and say, "Give me your oldest whiskey." And so darker meant better too. And a lot of people didn't know that Scotch whiskey legally allows caramel coloring to be put into the whiskey. So a lot of people thought that darker meant better as well. And that was right at the top of the 21st century. And Scotch whiskey was the one was in the lead in the United States. And about 6, 7 years later, all of a sudden bourbon showed up and started to suck all of the oxygen out of the air. But that hasn't stopped a lot of distilleries from opening up. There's Clydeside. There was a Daft Mill, Eden Mill opening up. There was Lockley opening up. About 10 years ago, Kilchoman opened up on Isla, and that was the first distillery that opened on Isla. And like, geez, I think it's like
They got hold of us 10 years ago, just as they opened. They had no importer, and they flew over with the whiskey in their suitcase, and we had it at a Burns night as part of our tasting.
oh,
And
that's
no,
fantastic.
had no idea that it was going to become this, and be appreciated as it is. But
Yeah, I mean they're a true farm distillery. Everything is done, so it's all single estate. Their grains and everything. And then Lindoris Abbey, which
lovely,
yeah,
wonderful
absolutely
story.
lovely. And so you've had the 20th century has been like this real, I mean, just massive rise of Scotch whiskey production, and they're pulling all of these older barrels out that they had, stored back there, and that's why you were starting to see older and older age statements show up, and then all of a sudden things start tightening up a little bit, right? And when things start tightening up a little bit, two reasons. Number one, production methods and maturation methods have become much better in the 21st century than they ever had. We can attribute that to a number of reasons, but one of them is a man that just sadly passed away a few years ago, a man named Dr. Jim Swan. And he's kind of like the Johnny Appleseed of world distilleries. And his papers and his writings and his research on the interaction between the atmosphere and wood and whiskey has led to maturation techniques that are used worldwide right now, and has really just elevated the game of why it's probably we're drinking the best tasting whiskey ever in the history of whiskey right now as a result of that.
But the other thing that's really amazed me is that whiskey is now commanding real collectors' prices. There have been some incredible things coming up for auction, early Macallans and different things that are, it's not that they're 100 years old, they're 40 years old.
Right. Yeah.
And so it really is something for listeners to remember, that if there's something in that cupboard that hasn't been touched, it may be be something to hold on to.
Well, a friend of mine who just wrote a book called Dusty Booze, guy named Aaron Goldfarb. So I'll plug his book. And he kind of covers that whole thing. I mean, like people looking for, ripping open, inside of walls of old houses in order to see if they can find any old bottles that are stashed in there.
But I think that the thing that we've been enjoying the last 10 years as you and I have worked together has been seeing Lindors take shape, seeing the Isle of Harris distillery, because it takes 10 years for something to have a first release. Just the enthusiasm behind it, seeing Arbaiki, take off in the way they have. And again, as you mentioned before, be a totally integrated situation where they're farming the grain and the potatoes and everything else, and the water from their land and everything. I do think the presentation matters. I think the bottles from Harris make the Isle of Harris distillery stand out. They say to you, this is the island, that beautiful pale blue.
It's textural. It's really very attractive.
And the Eden Mills bottles are so stunning. Lindors has the architecture of an abbey. So I think there's a lot of this whole part of it does matter. And that's part of
Well,
what you do.
yeah, I mean, we are in a crowded marketplace right now. As a matter of fact, what's been happening in the past year, we're starting to see a lot of challenges right now. And when you look at the entire consumer marketplace right now, you're starting to see that as well. We've had inflation challenges. We've had prices that have been kind of like we've been seeing them rising. It's a lot of post COVID. COVID was we're still kind of getting over the COVID hangover. A lot of people change their buying habits a lot during that time. You have a new generation now that is called the Gen Z generation that seems to take like health and welfare a little bit higher than actually consuming alcohol. So
The mocktails.
well, the mocktail, yeah, I know bartenders hate that word, but yeah, it's all of the non-alc products that are out there. But the other thing is mostly is in the 21st century, in the last 25 years, we've had more alcohol introduced into the marketplace than probably ever before in the history of capitalism. To give you an example how that affected everything, look at the craft distilling business in the United States. So, in order to distill spirits in the United States, you have to have a legal license granted by the federal government. It's called a DSP, Distilled Spirits Producer License. And that just tells the government that you've checked all the boxes and you're not going to blow anyone up, and you're going to make the right cuts so that you don't poison anybody. And there were 60 of those licenses granted all through the United States in the year 2000. And that included, the big alcohol factories like Archer Daniels Midland and a couple of the larger pharmaceutical and chemical companies that had these DSPs as well. In the year 2023, at the end of 2023, we quit counting at 2,400 distilleries. So let that disparity of numbers just sink in right there. There is a distillery everywhere that you turn around in every corner in every state of the union. You can buy bourbon that's made in Hawaii and Alaska, and you can buy gin that's made in southern Florida. And then what happened was that spurred all of this distilling from all over the world. So in traditional countries like Scotland, you started to see it. We went from like 100, I think maybe there was 119, 120 distilleries at the top of the century, the 21st century. We're past 150 now. In Ireland, there were 3 distilleries in the entire country at the end of the 20th century, and I think we're close to 50 now. We've got whiskeys coming from all over the world in places that did not have a whiskey tradition, like Australia and Taiwan. So yeah, so all of a sudden, I mean, the marketplace is just filled, and you walk into any retail shop, and you can just see the shelves are bulging.
But it's not
Now,
easy to get in there. The thing is that you come up with a whiskey or a gin in Scotland and you want to start exporting, and you don't just go and ship it into 50 all the states at all. I seem to see quite a lot of them being like 30. That seems to be, then they get a bit stuck.
well,
but
again,
also, you have like Gin Bothy, which was available, and now they tell us right now they're not going to be available to next year. They've hit a roadblock again.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the UK distillers make the same. They're all making the same mistake, which is why I'm in business, right? I mean, that's essentially what I do. I'm a Sherpa. I'm a brand Sherpa. So every one of them wants to get to the top of the mountain and put their flag up there, but I meet them at the base camp and make sure that they can zip up their parka and know how to read a map. And a lot of them don't. And so they're still making the same rookie mistakes now that we were making 10, 15 years ago when the surge started. We created something called a 3-tiered system which was one of the reasons that prohibition came to an end when they created an amendment to amend the amendment. One of the things they did, they said, well, we're washing our hands of regulating alcohol from the federal level. We're going to kick it down to the states. You're licensing barbers, and you're licensing schools, and you're licensing hairdressers. Why don't you go ahead and license whiskey too? Well, that sounds great, except that at the time there were 48 states. There's 48 states, and there's 48 different ways of doing that. So now there's 50. So now when someone comes into the United States, they're facing this Byzantine, snake-like approach of, how do I get my liquor, my product, into the hands of a consumer? And it's called three tiers because the supplier, the maker of the product, is the first tier.
Right.
Now, their only legal customer that they're allowed to actually transact a sale to is called a wholesale distributor. And those are positioned in every different market. So that means I have to find a wholesale distributor in New York State. I've got to find a separate one in New Jersey. I've got to find another one in Delaware, because each one of these states has different laws on how they license those wholesalers and how liquor gets dispensed.
So
and
can
then
I
those
ask you a basic question then?
Yeah.
So I'm brand Camilla, and I come to you, and though I go to Triumph or whoever it is, each state that they want to put it into is a separate form, a separate application for my brand. So
Right.
because I've noticed that though I might be able to get something for a brand down in Virginia, I try to get it through Triumph up in Jersey, and I can't.
Right. And because each state has different laws on how that's going to proceed. So each state licenses their wholesalers in the way that the state does. And then they are now mandating how the wholesaler can then sell to the next tier. Now, the next tier is what we call the trade, and that is retail and bottle shops and restaurants and bars. The wholesaler is licensed only to sell to that tier. That's their only legal customer they can sell to. So in New Jersey, where I live, a retail shop can sell liquor, wine, beer, popcorn, cheese, lottery tickets, glassware, cigars, all that stuff, right? Not only that, but one person can hold many different licenses. So I can open up 5 or 6 or 10 different liquor shops under one license. New York State, one license per one entity. So Camilla opens up a liquor store. That's the only liquor store that you get to open up under your name. Okay. Now, inside that liquor store, you can only sell wine and booze. Can't sell beer. You can't sell anything else but those two things: spirits, alcohol, or wine. That's it. Then you go to Texas, and Texas has an invisible fourth tier, which means that bars and restaurants have to go to licensed retailers and buy directly from them. They can't even buy from the wholesaler. Every state has its own crazy, insane laws. So if anybody comes into the United States and think that they're just going to drop off a couple pallets with an importer on, over in Elizabeth, New Jersey here, where all the warehouse is at, and get it sold, they are in for a rude awakening. And they don't realize that all the money and all of the resources it took for them to come up with the idea, build out the distillery, get the equipment in, learn how to make it, go through the production process, and in some cases age it, that's nothing nothing compared to what it's going to cost them to get that into the marketplace. So when I interview potential clients, one of the first questions I ask them is like, do you have enough money to lose for 3 to 5 years? Because you're going to be working in the red. And oh, by the way, that 20 state that 20 state blitz that you think you're going to do, I got news for you. We're going to pick four. Those 10 products you have, guess what? They're coming down to three. Otherwise, you're going to go broke, and you're just going to, like I said, the brand Sherpa that takes you up the mountain. I've seen all the dead bodies lying in the cold and in the snow and in the rock crevasses, and my job is to make sure whoever I'm working with is not the next one. That's typically
Right.
that's typically what happens.
It really is quite incredible. And I've tried to explain it to people when they said, oh, I just want to bring some of my new product over and have it tested during Tartan Week. And you go, no, you can't just do that.
Can't do that. Yeah.
They
And
don't get it.
they don't. Yeah. And the other thing is like a lot of people want to come over, they want to show off their product. Well, to who, if I can't find it?
No, that's the thing.
That's the other thing. It's kind of like, oh, that was really delicious. Where can I get it? Oh, well, it's not really here yet. Well, then why did you just waste my time? What?
We've been having a lot of fun with trying out some of the smaller distilleries, and alongside working with, we've been very fortunate recently to be working with Glenmorangie and Murray Hennessy, and then alongside some of the smaller brands that we've been chatting about, and of Lindors and Harris, etc. I mean, it's wonderful to see what's going on.
Well, with an organization like yours, I mean, what we try to do is try to get as wide, an indication of what's going on with Scotch whiskey, and in many cases gin as well. And so and then there's a lot of these distilleries, like for example Benriach and Glassa, that have been revitalized, that have been reopened, and then have had new people or new companies that have bought them and just poured a lot of money in there. And but then they actually have a route to market too. And those are, just wonderful brands that are being rediscovered. And Glenmorangie, probably one of the most innovative distilling operations out there, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, together. Dr. Bill Lumsden, I know Bill, he's a friend, an absolute crazy man. When it comes down to let's try this next. And, and he's got fortunate enough to have the resources behind him to allow that to happen. So, and we'll continue to see like more and more new and unusual and really beautifully tasty things that come out of there as well. So, yeah.
But you also do, so that we finish, round this up a little bit, that people can take a course with you. You have that great book that I love. On the whole gamut of whiskey, and then you also do courses.
So I have been teaching a whiskey course in New York City for 15 years. And it's the longest. And actually, I'm going on my 16th in next year. It's called Whiskey Smackdown, and it's at the Astor Center in the Lower East Side in New York City. I do it once a month or once a quarter, and people can sign up for that class. And like the one I've got coming up in October is called Bourbon versus Scotch. So we'll take 3 bourbons and take 3 scotches, and we'll compare and contrast, the production styles, where they come from, what's the heritage behind them, and why do they taste the way that they do in the glass. I do one for world whiskeys. I do one for craft, American craft whiskeys. I even do Irish and versus Japanese. And I even do a cognac versus Armagnac as well.
But I think we ought to join you for one of those, that would be fun.
Absolutely. All you have to do is go up to astorcenternyc.com and you can find my class up there and sign up. And then,
I
of
love
course,
this.
what came out of there was my book. A few years ago, one of my students came up to me afterwards and handed me his card, told me he was an editor for a well-known publisher, and they were looking for someone to write the definitive whiskey course book. He liked my class and thought this was going to be a perfect matchup. So we signed a contract, and I wrote the complete whiskey course, which you had referred to. Thank you. And that's been out since 2019, and it covers whiskey from all over the world and everything about it, from the production and the history of it to its use and how to drink it and how to have a party at home with it and glassware and the entire thing. And I've got a second book in the works, which I just finished. I handed in the manuscript, and now we're kind of in editing. So I can actually talk about it right now. It's called The History of Whiskey in 100 Bottles, Barrels, and Vessels.
Wow.
So I'm using so something really small, so I'm using these 100 portals as portals into the history of whiskey worldwide, and that'll be out in October of 2025.
So we can't get any copies yet, but
Not
next
yet.
year we're going to be doing some signings again.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today and taking us into this fascinating world that we all enjoy so much. And you really are always such a help to us, and we support you, and you support us through so much. So thank you,
greatly
Robin.
appreciate it. Well, my pleasure, Camilla. Great talking with you.
And so we'll talk very soon. And I think a few of us ought to be going off to taking your course, because I think is a good idea. Ask the place.
Bring your mouse and just click.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye. And now I'm delighted that we're meeting up with Euan Kinninmonth. He's the brand manager of Eden Mills, which is a brand that we have recently become aware of. Euan, good morning. I fell in love with their bottles. They're stunning. And
Hi.
I'm delighted to meet you. And I've been delighted to start to learn of the journey of Eden Mills, because you have brought distilling back to the area of St. Andrews after 150 years. And that's in itself is just the most incredible story.
Well, it absolutely is. You're absolutely correct. And thank you for having me on, Camilla. Eden Mill started production just outside St. Andrews in 2012. When we laid down our first cask of single malt whiskey in 2014, the first time whiskey had been produced in the St. Andrews area for over 150 years. Prior to that, it was being produced on this very site by Hague Whiskey. Now, I'm sure we've all heard of Hague and the most recent Hague Club, which is now the Diageo blended whiskey. But they were the last ones to make whiskey in this area way back in the early 1800s. Until Eden Mill came along and started bringing back that lost art of distilling.
So was there a distillery there that was just sort of shut up and was cow sheds or something?
Yes, absolutely. So the Hague family were synonymous with farming and whiskey production in Fife. And this was their base from 1810 till 1856. They operated Seggy Distillery right on the banks of the River Eden here. They later moved that to the Cameron Bridge Distillery, which is still the Diageo-owned facility. But the site was completely closed down and had become part of the industrial history of St. Andrews and went into paper production. So it was a paper mill from 1867 right up till 2008 there. So the site we're on is just steeped in history. But what's really special is it's steeped in a lost history of whiskey production that we've managed to bring back.
Did you find any of the early records that maybe gave you a little bit of a direction and ideas about some things?
Not really. We really sort of started with our own direction. Yes, we are aware of a lot of the history that's in the archives. For example, I grew up in St Andrews, and when I say it's a lost history, it really has been lost through generations. You know, when I think of talking to my grandparents, my great-grandparents, no one really ever talked about whiskey production in this area. So it really was a lost history, and something we were quite excited to discover when we started making whiskey on this very site. But very much Eden Mill started to blaze our own trail and hit our own direction for what we wanted to do here.
So you have been doing a gin,
Yep.
and now the whiskies since
Yep.
really 2014 was when
Yes.
you really started
Yep.
pushing it out.
Yeah, so we laid down our first casks in 2014. Producing whiskey is a very expensive habit, and very much gin came along as a much more instant product for us, but also quite an exciting product to start to produce back in 2014. And allowed our distillers to really get creative with recipe creation and hone their skills there. So yes, gin is very much became our big product and went through an astronomical rise in popularity through from 2014 right through to the current day.
Each year we invite an artist inspired by our hometown of St Andrews to make their mark on our most exclusive range of whiskies. Our collaborator this year is Babs Pease, a printmaker who hand carves her designs before printing with an antique relief press. Crafted by head distiller Scott Ferguson, this year's single malt is matured in sherry and red wine casks before finishing in first fill Amarone, imbuing the whiskey with a dark copper colour and notes of cherry and almond. The artist with her block and tools, the distiller with his casks and stills, both are masters of their respective crafts. But not everything can be tamed or predicted. With its rugged coastline, ruined spires, and cobbled streets, St Andrews too is built on centuries of chance. Like this place we call home, like the art it inspires, with this whiskey, things have come together perfectly.
Well, part of this episode today has also been talking to a whiskey ambassador, Robin Robinson, who you may know over here. And he's been explaining how very complicated and challenging it is to bring your products into the United States.
Yep.
So has this been challenging for you? And when did they begin to appear here? Because I have not been so aware of them till recently.
So Eden Mill have always been a company that very much punched above our weight. I feel we're a very small company, very small team, but we have been able to distribute our gins certainly in the States probably since around 2017 there. Now initially it started very small, working with some small importers, mainly on the West Coast and in Texas. Texas has always been a big state for us. Yes, it is a challenge. Robert's absolutely correct. It's about working with the right people and starting to build a brand, because it's a huge marketplace. More recently, we have made some major steps forward, working with larger importers and larger distributors, but very much a focused, targeted approach, rather than we'll call it a scattergun of
Shotgun.
Yeah, trying to get your gin and your whiskey into every bar, every market there is. We focused very much in the initial stages on Southern California We have a brand manager, Everett DM, based in San Diego, and we started to very slowly start to build our brand in that area. That has grown significantly over the last 12 months, and we're now listed right across the state of California. We are available in New York. We are available in Texas still very, very big state for us. And this week we're actually launching our gins in Florida as well. Being from the home of golf, St Andrews, very much a lot of our brand building is built around the popularity of golf as a sport and the how famous St Andrews is as a location. So being able to bring what we term the spirit of St Andrews to golf fans all over the world and of course in the States has been really exciting for us. But it is something we need to build, and we will continue to build that brand right across the States. Arizona as well has just been added to our list of states. So very exciting things to come from Eden Mill.
But what I love about your brand is you're so fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, your bottling, your colors. I mean, they have so much energy to them. And I think that really is wonderful. And Kimberly Bradford from St Andrews, LA, introduced me to Eden Mills and how wonderful it was. And I'm so grateful to her because, as you say, you first of all were really concentrating more on the West Coast.
Yes.
So this is great that we now have you on you've ventured east.
Yes, we have ventured very much ventured east there. Yeah, like I said, listed in New York as well as a lot of smaller states surrounding on the east coast. You know, it's very interesting what you say about the bottles themselves, about the packaging, and you know, ultimately, I'm a big believer that the quality is in the liquid, but people buy with their eyes. And very much it's important in a very competitive marketplace to be able to stand out on the shelf. When you go into a bar and you're surveying the back of the bar, thinking, all right, well, what gin am I going to buy? You want a bottle that's going to pop out at you and grab your attention. So it's the first experience of Eden Mill is looking at the bottle. We actually do a whiskey called the Art of St Andrews. Now, the Art of St Andrews is a very limited single malt whiskey that we release every year. And every year we work with a local artist from the St Andrews area to help us design the box. And these are always stunning boxes. And we will be about to launch our 2024 Art of St Andrews in the next coming weeks and months in the States. Which has been produced recently for us, so that's really exciting.
Well, we're very proud to be able to be in on your journey as it now expands to the East Coast and all that's going on. And as you've gone along, what have been sort of some of the milestones of recognition that you've had?
I suppose it's more recently. For me, if focusing on the gin first of all, because the whiskey always takes time. It takes time in cask to mature until it's ready to put it into bottle. So back in 2018, in the UK, one of our gins, our golf gin, won one of the best gins in Scotland, and at that time Scotland was producing hundreds of gin. So to get that recognition, and when I talk about recognition, I don't necessarily talk about the branding or the bottles. I talk about the quality of liquid. And the great thing about some of these spirits contests is they are blind tasted. So nobody sees any of the brand, any of the story, any of the bottle. They try the liquid and they vote for what is the best liquid. And I think that for me is one of the biggest piece of recognitions.
What are your tones, or I'm sorry, Dan, we use to the gin, because the sort of kelp in the Harris gin one that comes through heavily.
Yeah, so our golf gin, which is one of our more popular gins, It's inspired by some of the local botanicals that grow around our links golf courses.
Mhm.
So in there, you've got things like lavender, pine. We have sea kelp in there as well. And we've got gorse flower in there as well. So for people that don't know what gorse, if you've ever played golf in St Andrews, it's usually where you lose your ball. It's that spiky bush that you'll lose your ball in. But by using these botanicals, we are making a gin that instantly transports you to a location. And that location is that sort of cold, misty golf course in St Andrews. But the sea kelp itself is actually harvested locally from just up the coast in St Andrews from Kings Barnes there. So you get this beautiful salty finish to the gin. So as much as possible, Eden Mill will use local botanicals in our gins, because it's all about sustainability and the provenance of our location.
And you have 4 whiskies.
Yes.
And the casks are the secret, it seems to me.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much things that go into making a beautiful whiskey. So everything from the grain, the barley that's used, to your fermentation as the flavors develop. But yes, ultimately the majority of the flavors will be delivered by the cask, and you may get different arguments about, no, it's the barley, no, it's the yeast, but absolutely it's spending the majority of its life inside this wooden cask, and that is where the flavors will really start to develop. So since day one, Eden Mill have always tried to experiment with different types of wood and different cask finishes, but ultimately to our core, we have always stuck with a very rigid core maturation program of first fill bourbon and first fill sherry. So those beautiful first fill bourbon casks coming over to us from the States will deliver lovely notes of toffee, vanilla, slight little wood spice to it as well, and some dried fruit coming through from it. Really develops a beautiful whiskey. And right now we have a whiskey called our bourbon cask single malt whiskey, and that is roughly around 6 years old now, and is exclusively matured in first fill bourbon, and it's just a beautiful dram. You get the light floral notes of the lowland style for where we are in Scotland, but the bourbon cask really delivers a lovely bit of sweetness to the whiskey. On the other side of that, like I mentioned, we use first fill sherry casks. Now the sherry casks deliver completely different flavor notes, very rich, quite sulfury compounds you'll get from the sherry cask. But I always use the phrase, and not everyone all over the world gets this phrase, but the sherry cask whiskey reminds me of my granny's Christmas cake. So it's spiced fruits, it's marzipan, it's brown sugar, it's a little bit of cinnamon coming through. All these beautiful, rich flavors, balanced with a nice little bit of pepperiness to it as well. So yeah, both of them very different whiskies because of the cask that they have been matured in, but both equally beautiful whiskies.
That's wonderful. So what I'd like to do today is, I'm so delighted that we're going to be able to start to work with you a little bit and allow our members and friends who are attending some of our events and things to taste Eden Mills in the coming weeks. But they are able now to purchase Eden Mills on the East Coast as well, in New York, New Jersey.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely. We are starting to be listed in certain retailers, but online as well. If you visit www.edenmill.us, you're able to order our gins and our whiskies, and they can be delivered right to your door.
All right. So we will send them to your website. They can double check where they can get them and how to get them. And we're going to look forward to continuing our conversation with you, maybe visiting with you the distillery next time and looking around. That's always great fun to do. And I have to say that it's just a pleasure to discover this wonderful taste of St Andrews that's now going to be over here with us.
Well,
Thank
that's what I always say. Just one sip from the glass, and you're transported to St Andrews. So absolutely fantastic, and I hope all your members enjoy when the time comes to be able to try some of our spirits.
No, we're going to. So thank you again,
No
Euan.
problem at
Take
all.
care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye now. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us this week. We hope this has helped you understand a little bit more the complexities of bringing the wonderful Scottish whiskies and gins to market here in the United States. Join us in 2 weeks as we bring you another episode of The Scots in Us, and stay up to date on all we're doing by visiting our website, AmericanScottishFoundation.com. And so until next time.